They looked at her uniform and saw nothing but a filing clerk. Coffee runs, paperwork, invisible to everyone who mattered. But when Lieutenant Colonel Hayes walked into that break room and called her General, the whole base went dead silent. What happened next changed everything they thought they knew. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden identity and sweet justice, hit that like button if you love stories where the underdog gets the last laugh, and subscribe because we've got more jaw-dropping tales coming your way. My name is Rebecca Stone, and for 3 months I lived a lie that would change everything. Every morning at 0600 hours, I'd slip on that plain administrative uniform, pin my hair back in a simple bun, and walk through the gates of Fort Madison like I was nobody special. Just another clerk heading to another day of pushing papers and answering phones. That's exactly what I wanted them to think. You see, the Department of Defense had been getting reports about Fort Madison for months, serious allegations of corruption, abuse of power, and misconduct that went all the way to the top. But every time they sent official investigators, somehow the evidence would disappear, witnesses would clam up, and the guilty parties would slip through the cracks like smoke. That's when they decided to try something different. They needed someone on the inside, someone who could observe without being noticed, someone who could blend into the background like wallpaper. That someone was me. Colonel Rebecca Stone, 22 years of distinguished service, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, and currently the most invisible person on this entire base. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd commanded troops in Afghanistan, briefed generals in the Pentagon, and here I was, filing incident reports and pretending I didn't know the difference between a court-martial and a parking ticket. The first week was almost amusing. I'd watch officers half my age bark orders, completely oblivious to the fact that I outranked most of them by several pay grades. I perfected the art of keeping my eyes down, my voice soft, and my opinions to myself. But as the days turned into weeks, that amusement began to curdle into something much darker. Captain Jennifer Walsh was the first to really test my resolve. She had this way of looking right through you, like you were made of glass. I remember the first time she snapped her fingers at me across the office. "Hey, clerk!" "My coffee's gone cold again. Make yourself useful." The casual cruelty in her voice made my jaw clench, but I smiled politely and reached for the coffee pot. 22 years of military discipline is a powerful thing, but it's also what kept me from showing her exactly what I thought of her attitude. Then there was Sergeant Torres, Walsh's loyal lapdog, who seemed to take genuine pleasure in making the administrative staff miserable. He had this habit of leaving his mess for others to clean up, dropping files on the floor just to watch someone scramble to pick them up. "That's what clerks are for," he'd say with that smug grin that made my fingers itch to wipe it off his face. But the real target of my investigation was Major Richard Blake. This man was a walking textbook of everything wrong with unchecked authority. He strutted around that base like he owned it, completely unaware that every dollar he'd skimmed, every regulation he'd bent, every junior officer he'd intimidated was being carefully documented. What made it worse was watching him in action, the way he'd humiliate subordinates in front of their peers, the casual threats, the absolute certainty that his rank made him untouchable. I spent my days in that cramped office, watching and listening, my fingers flying across keyboard keys as I typed up reports that would eventually bring this whole house of cards crashing down. But I had to play the part perfectly. Every "yes, sir" had to sound genuine. Every apologetic smile had to mask the fire burning in my chest, and every moment of manufactured helplessness had to convince them that I was exactly what I appeared to be. Just another faceless clerk who knew her place. What none of them realized was that I was building a case that would destroy their careers, one filing mistake and one humiliating comment at a time. They saw weakness where there was actually strength, incompetence where there was actually strategy, and vulnerability where there was actually the most dangerous thing of all, a soldier with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. By the second month, something shifted. The casual disrespect I'd endured had transformed into something more deliberate, more vicious. It was like they could sense my composure, and it infuriated them. Captain Walsh had made it her personal mission to break whatever dignity she thought I had left. "Stone!" She'd bark across the bullpen, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Get over here and clean up this mess." She'd deliberately knock over her coffee cup, the dark liquid spreading across important documents, then stand back with her arms crossed, waiting. The first time it happened, I felt my face burn with humiliation as I grabbed paper towels and got on my hands and knees. But what really stung was the silence from my fellow clerks, good people too terrified to speak up because they knew they'd be next. The psychological warfare escalated daily. Torres would dump boxes of files on my desk right before closing time, heavy enough that my back ached from lifting them. "Hope you weren't planning on leaving early, clerk," he'd sneer. "Real soldiers work overtime." I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd spent in foxholes while he was probably safe in some stateside office, but instead, I just nodded and started sorting through the paperwork. What made it unbearable wasn't just the treatment, it was watching them treat others the same way. Young privates who reminded me of my own daughter, getting screamed at for mistakes that weren't their fault. Administrative staff who'd been there for years, reduced to tears by Walsh's public humiliations. Every fiber of my being screamed to intervene, to use my real authority to protect them, but I had to stay in character. The bigger picture was what mattered. The breaking point started building on a Tuesday morning that I'll never forget. Major Blake stormed into our office like a hurricane, his face red with rage. He'd discovered that several files from his office had gone missing, files that I'd carefully photographed and secured as evidence of his embezzlement scheme, but of course, he had no idea that his clerk was actually documenting his crimes. "Which one of you incompetent idiots lost my files?" he roared, slamming his fist on the nearest desk. The entire office went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, papers rustling, hearts pounding. Blake's eyes swept across the room like a predator choosing his prey, and they landed squarely on me. "You," he pointed a thick finger in my direction. "Stone, you're always handling my paperwork. Where are my procurement files?" His voice was getting louder with each word, and I could see spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. This was a man losing control, and dangerous because of it. I kept my voice level, professional. "Sir, I haven't seen those particular files. Perhaps they were misfiled or—" That's when he exploded. The mask of military professionalism that most officers wear, even corrupt ones, completely disappeared. "Don't you dare lie to me," he shouted, moving closer until he was towering over my desk. "Do you have any idea what those files contain? What's at stake here?" Oh, I knew exactly what was at stake. His career, his freedom, his whole corrupt empire. But I just stared up at him with what I hoped looked like confused innocence. Captain Walsh, sensing an opportunity to curry favor with her superior, jumped in like a shark smelling blood. "Maybe our little clerk here needs a lesson in respecting her betters," she said, her voice dripping with malice. She walked over and deliberately swept a stack of completed reports off my desk, sending papers flying across the floor like oversized confetti. "Oops," she said with fake sweetness. "Better pick those up, Stone." "Wouldn't want Major Blake to think you can't handle simple tasks?" The room was electric with tension. Some of the other staff looked away, embarrassed by what they were witnessing. Others watched with the horrified fascination of people seeing a car accident. I could feel something dangerous building in my chest. 22 years of command authority pushing against this charade like water against a dam. My hands were shaking as I knelt to collect the scattered papers, not from fear but from the sheer effort of restraining myself. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stand up, to put these bullies in their place, to remind them what real military bearing looked like. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because Blake was getting sloppy, making mistakes, revealing just how deep his corruption ran, and Walsh's cruelty was being witnessed by more and more people who would eventually testify to her conduct. I was building an ironclad case, one humiliation at a time. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was a Friday afternoon and Major Blake had been drinking. I could smell it on him from across the room. He'd been frantically searching for more files, getting increasingly paranoid as he realized just how much evidence had vanished from his office. His corruption scheme was unraveling, and he was desperate enough to do something truly stupid. "Stone!" His voice cracked like a whip across the office. "Get over here, now!" There was something different in his tone this time, something dangerous. So, I looked up from my computer to see him standing by his office door, his face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists. Every instinct I'd developed in combat zones was screaming at me that this situation was about to go very bad, very quickly. I stood up slowly, deliberately keeping my movements non-threatening. "Yes, sir?" But the moment I got within arm's reach, he grabbed me. Not a gentle touch on the shoulder, he seized my upper arm with enough force that I knew there'd be bruises later. His fingers dug into my flesh through my uniform sleeve, and for the first time in 3 months, my carefully constructed facade cracked. "Where are my files?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. His breath reeked of bourbon and desperation. "I know you took them. I know you're working with someone. Tell me who." He was shaking me now, and I could feel my shoulder socket straining against his grip. The entire office had gone dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted floor. That's when Captain Walsh decided to join the party. "Maybe we should call the MPs," she said, but there was excitement in her voice, like she was enjoying the show. "Have her arrested for theft. Make an example out of her." She was practically bouncing on her toes with anticipation. I felt something snap inside my chest. Not breaking, but snapping back into place like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. 22 years of command presence, of battlefield authority, of earned respect was clawing its way to the surface. Blake was still gripping my arm, still shouting threats, when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Boots marching down the hallway in perfect military rhythm. The office door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes strode in with 2 MPs flanking him, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Hayes was a good soldier, one of the few I'd briefed on my real mission, and seeing his colonel being assaulted by some corrupt major had transformed his usually calm demeanor into something that could have melted steel. "What the hell is going on in here?" Hayes barked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes grown men stand at attention without thinking. Blake's grip on my arm loosened slightly, but he was too drunk and too panicked to fully process what was happening. "Just disciplining a thieving clerk, Colonel," Blake slurred, trying to sound official while still maintaining his death grip on my arm. "She's been stealing classified documents." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was accusing me of stealing the very evidence of his own crimes. Hayes's face went white. Not pale, not concerned. White as fresh snow. He stared at Blake's hand on my arm like he was looking at a man signing his own death warrant. "Major Blake," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I strongly suggest you let go of her. Right now." "Why?" Blake laughed, a ugly sound that showed just how far gone he was. "She's just a clerk. What do you care what happens to some pencil-pushing nobody?" That's when Hayes straightened to his full height, every inch the professional soldier. His voice rang out clear and sharp across that silent office. "Major Blake, you are currently assaulting a superior officer. I repeat, you are physically restraining General Rebecca Stone." The silence that followed was absolute. It was like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. Blake's hand fell away from my arm like I was made of molten lava. Walsh's face drained of all color. Even the MPs looked stunned, though they'd been briefed on my real identity. I straightened up slowly, feeling my real self emerge like a butterfly from a cocoon. The meek posture melted away, my shoulders squared, my chin lifted, and suddenly I wasn't looking up at Blake anymore. I was looking down at him, and he seemed to shrink before my eyes. "General," Blake whispered, the word barely escaping his lips like air leaking from a punctured tire. The color had completely drained from his face, and I watched as the full weight of his situation crashed down on him like a building collapse. He'd just physically assaulted a general officer of the United States Army, in front of witnesses, while drunk. The career he'd built on corruption and intimidation was over, and we both knew it. I let the silence stretch for a long moment, savoring the look of absolute terror in his eyes. When I finally spoke, my voice carried 22 years of earned authority. "At ease, Colonel Hayes." The simple command transformed the entire atmosphere of the room. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one in control. Captain Walsh had gone completely catatonic, staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound was coming out. The woman who'd spent months making my life miserable couldn't even form words. Torres, meanwhile, had pressed himself against the wall so hard I thought he might leave an impression in the drywall. "You want to know where your files are, Major Blake?" I asked, straightening my uniform jacket with deliberate precision. "They're exactly where they need to be, in the hands of investigators who've been building a case against you for the past 3 months. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, the one I'd been compiling with meticulous care. Embezzlement of government funds, abuse of authority, intimidation of subordinates, and now, assault on a superior officer. Blake tried to stammer out some kind of apology, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. "General, I had no idea. If I'd known your rank..." But I cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "Stop right there, Major. Your ignorance of my rank doesn't excuse your conduct towards someone you believed was beneath you." My voice was getting stronger with each word, and I could see other people in the office, the real clerks, the administrative staff who'd suffered under these bullies, starting to stand a little straighter. "The fact that you thought I was just a clerk makes your behavior worse, not better." That's when the dam burst. Walsh suddenly found her voice and started babbling about how she was just following orders, how she'd never really meant any harm, how she'd always respected the enlisted personnel. It was pathetic watching her try to rewrite 3 months of documented cruelty in real time. "Save it, Captain," I said, my voice cutting through her excuses like a blade. "Every humiliation you inflicted, every degrading task you assigned, every moment you made these good people feel worthless, it's all documented, signed statements from witnesses, video surveillance, audio recordings." I gestured toward the people around us. "Did you think they'd stay silent forever?" The MPs moved forward on Hayes's signal, and Blake didn't even resist as they placed him in restraints. He was muttering something about lawyers and appeals, but we all knew it was over. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and assaulting a general officer was the final nail in his coffin. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of the entire operation. One by one, the administrative staff, the people who'd been terrorized into silence for months, started speaking up. Private Jackson told Hayes about the time Walsh made her scrub floors with a toothbrush. Corporal Martinez described how Blake had threatened to ruin his career over a minor filing error. Specialist Chen broke down crying as she recounted months of verbal abuse. I addressed the entire room, making sure my voice carried to every corner. "This is how you treat people when you think they can't fight back? When you believe rank gives you the right to abuse anyone, clerk, private, or general." The shame on their faces was almost painful to watch, but it was necessary. Real leadership means protecting those under your command, not preying on them. 6 months later, the justice was complete. Blake was court-martialed, stripped of rank, and dishonorably discharged. The embezzlement charges earned him 3 years in federal prison. Walsh was demoted to lieutenant and transferred to the most remote posting the Army could find. Torres spent the rest of his enlistment on permanent kitchen duty. But the real victory wasn't the punishment of the guilty, it was watching Fort Madison transform. The administrative staff walked taller, spoke up when they saw problems, and knew their voices mattered. New policies were implemented to protect personnel from abuse, and every officer on that base learned a lesson they'd never forget. If this story of hidden strength and perfect karma gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that you never know who you're really dealing with. Subscribe for more incredible true stories where justice always finds a way. And remember, treat everyone with respect, because you never know who might be watching. What would you have done in General Stone's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.